Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. So in this video, we're going to talk about braking issues. In particular, we have a braking noise when we're driving. I want to diagnose it, so let's go for a ride. Let's do a little braking. Oh, I got a pulsation for sure. I got somebody behind me. I'll just pull over for a sec. Ooh, listen to that. This thing's a race car, 4-cylinder. All right, let's hit the brakes. Ooh, that does not sound good. Let's try it again. I love this road. Well, I don't know if you can hear it, but I can hear it and I can feel it. This isn't good at all. I need to get back to the studio so I can check this out. Turn around. All right, it's in the studio. Let's go ahead and pop the hood here. The first thing I always like to do whenever I have a braking issue of any sort is to check the master cylinder. The master cylinder is what's going to house the brake fluid, and it's almost always on the driver's side, at least in the United States. Look for the maximum line, look for the minimum line, make sure it's somewhere in between. If it looks like it's a little low, you're going to want to check that because maybe the brakes are a little low as well. So let's leave that hood up. I'm going to go ahead and put the car up in the air, check all the brakes. Well, I don't really hear anything like this. Let's go ahead and rev it up a little bit. Well, I don't hear very much from this side. I'm going to check the other side real quick. Okay, so of course, while we have it in the studio and we're trying to test to see if we can hear any noise, it's not making any noise for some reason. Obviously, I want to make sure that when I get in the studio, I'm going to want to check all 4 brakes. It's kind of how I roll. While I was on a road test, I did happen to hear that there was noise coming from the right front right here. This is, of course, one of the areas that I'm going to pay special attention to because I know that there's definitely something going on here, even though I couldn't necessarily hear it while I was in the studio. This is something that's very common though. Generally, people drive around in their cars a lot more than their mechanics are gonna. So if somebody was to bring me a car because they drive it every day, maybe back and forth to work or wherever they might happen to go, they're gonna hear more noises than I'm gonna hear. When I hop in this thing to go for a road test, I'm probably only going to be driving it for approximately 10, maybe 15 minutes. I can't go out to the beach with it, I can't go get ice cream or even go pick up my lunch and spend any time inside the vehicle. I'm kind of just trying to figure out exactly what's going on in the shortest amount of time as possible, and then I want to get straight into the diagnosis process. So with all that said, I'm going to start taking off all the wheels on this vehicle so I can go ahead and check all 4 brakes. That's how I roll. Go ahead and pop off the center cap on this or the hubcap on it. We'll set that aside, remove all my lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Get this out of here. Oh man. Just looking at this real quick, I can see some issues. We've got a lot of rot buildup on this. You can tell that these rotors are very old. Looking at the outer pad right here, it looks like I maybe have 2 or 3 30-seconds. Maybe that sounds like it's quite a bit of meat. Maybe you think that I can just move along to the next brake, but there isn't only an outer brake pad on this. There has to be an inner pad and an outer pad. So we need to take a look at that. The best way to look at it is to thoroughly inspect it. To do that, I need to go ahead and take the caliper off the bracket and then remove the pads. Go ahead and get that caliper off of there. Now what I want to do is inspect the caliper. I'm looking to see if it's leaking anywhere. That could be a common reason why I might have low brake fluid. This one doesn't look like it's leaking at all. So of course I'm going to try to push back this caliper, but I'll get to that in a second. I'm going to set this aside so it's putting no pressure on the flex hose here. That's very important. I don't want to cause a secondary issue. Now I can see my outer pad. Oh, geez. It's a little hot, but they should move around pretty easy. I'm going to have to pry that right out of there. Let's see. Look at all these tins. That's not making any noise. Try and pry this off. You want to be careful doing this if you feel as though you're going to be reusing the brake pads, but these are worn low, as I can see right here. This one doesn't really look too bad. It's worn kind of unevenly due to the rot that's built up along this area here and over there. I'll set that aside. Let's check that inner pad. Oh, man. Yeah. Holy moly. Oh, wow. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but that's worn pretty low. Somebody was driving around on this like a maniac and potentially putting me in an unsafe predicament while I was driving it around. That's why I don't typically go for a very long road test, especially if I'm checking out braking issues. Wow. Okay, so now at this point we know we definitely need pads. You can tell that these are completely unsafe to drive on. The rotors are complete garbage. They're rotted out. This is going to cause some major issues. You can hear that noise. Next thing I want to check is the slider pins right along here. Now these slider pins are supposed to be able to go in and out very easily. As you can tell, this one's kind of sticking in here. It's not completely frozen, so that's nice. This one right here, same. It spins a little bit, but it also doesn't slide and function as smoothly as what it should. That could potentially cause an issue where the caliper isn't able to function and release, and it's of course going to wear out the brakes. So continuing with the caliper, let's use a caliper depression tool right here. We're just going to go ahead and take this caliper piston, and we're going to try to press it in real quick. Essentially, we want to make sure that the caliper functions properly. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this ready. Get that on there. I'm going to try to squeeze this in a little bit. What we're paying attention to is to see if this caliper piston presses all the way up into this area here. That's going to be very important. If it feels like it's stuck in any way or it's hard to push in, you need to go ahead and replace these calipers. Also, when we're pushing it in, we're making sure there's no fluid that comes out. Sometimes when you put things under pressure, fluid's going to try to escape. This one's actually looking really good. Okay. So I'm just going to continue pushing this in, and then of course I'm going to go over and do the same to the other side of the vehicle. After that, I'll go ahead and work my way to the rear and confirm that we don't have an issue with the rear brakes as well. Kind of like a multiple trauma type of issue. This caliper is actually really good. Let's get that all the way in there. Perfect. It's all the way in. I don't see any fluid leaking out. So we can continue on, like I said, to the other side. We're just going to confirm that. You don't necessarily need to watch me do it because you just watched it on this side. Then we'll move along to the rear and we'll get you back in on the video. I don't hear any noise. Let's pop this off of here. Remove my lug nuts. This little bonk. Remove those drums. We want to inspect the drum braking surface right along here. You want to make sure that it's not scoured or has a whole bunch of grooves in it. If it looks like it's mirrored or has a whole bunch of grooves, that's going to obviously cause an issue where you're going to hear some sort of noise. You'd also want to pay attention to why it might have any of those grooves. This one looks pretty decent. Let's continue on by taking a look at our braking shoes right here. Now essentially when you step on the brake, this wheel cylinder right here is going to expand the pistons inside of it. That's going to push both of these shoes out and against the drum braking surface right here. So if any of that isn't functioning properly, you're going to have an issue. I'm feeling along this. I don't feel any grooves. I don't feel any discrepancies where it feels like the shoe's been chewed up by maybe something fell inside there. But I do see a lot of brake dust. Brake dust like this can cause a little bit of an issue or even a noise, but it's really not too bad. It's very common because where's the brake dust going to go as you're driving down the road? I'll just go ahead and clean this up. We're going to check the other side, and then of course we're going to move along to confirming, like I said before, that issue that we have in the front, we're going to go ahead and fix it. Get my collection bucket down there. What I'm doing here is just trying to get off the majority of the brake dust in the area and any rust that might be in the localized area. A lot of times what you're going to find is on the backing plate right here, you might find a lot of rot or rust buildup on those, and sometimes these might even feel very weak. These are very strong. I'm not worried about that, so I'm just kind of paying attention to see if I can find any large chunks inside of here that need to be cleaned out. This looks pretty good. Spray it down a little bit more. Wipe that down. Now let's look at the drum. As for the drum itself, like I said, we're paying attention to the braking surface. That looks great. And then all the time, not necessarily all the time, I don't know why I said all the time, but sometimes what you're going to find is a whole bunch of rot inside this area here. That's essentially going to be inside along here, and so it's going to hold moisture. The moisture is going to sit on the metal, swell it up, it's going to start to rot and flake. If anything like that happens, you might hear like a when you're spinning the wheel or even driving down the road. That isn't a noise that I heard in this one. I kind of felt more of a brake pulsation and kind of more of like a deeper type of noise coming from the front. Like I said, I always pay attention to all four brakes. I'm not just going to check out half of it and do a half type of job. So this looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and spray it down. We'll let that dry. I'm going to use a little bit of copper never seize on the mating surface of this. We can get our drum back on here, grab that wheel, that collection plate out of there. Get this up on there, start on all the lug nuts, we'll bottom them out, and then I'm going to move along to doing the same to the other side. I always torque all the wheels at the same time. It doesn't make sense to just torque one now and then move along, torque another one later, because you could potentially forget one, and of course that's going to be an issue. You don't want to drive down the road with one of your lug nuts loose or any of your wheels falling off. It's not very safe. This looks good. Let's see. This on here. Leave that one in there a little bit. There's that. We can set that aside. Grab that hammer. I'm just going to go ahead and knock this rotor off of here. I always try to put on a lug nut just in case this tries flying off. Hand and eye protection at all times. Okay. Daggone. Ugh, I need to clean this up. What I'm trying to do here is just try to make this as smooth as possible. It's very important because if you have any discrepancies, you're going to more than likely get a brake pulsation of some sort. Okay, my little brush. You got to make sure you get in between these areas too. This is super important. Now once you have all that done, I always like to try to get in the back here. A lot of times you're going to find some sort of debris that just wants to fall out of there. If I was to put the brakes together and then drive this down the road and any of this debris fell in between the rotor and the brake pads, boom, another brake noise, and I could potentially cause damage to my brakes. Ooh, there's a lot in there. Oh man, this bracket is something else. Let's go ahead and pull these sliders out of the bracket. Oh, dang. Yeah. Okay. Looking at the caliper sliders, you want to make sure that you keep them exactly where they originally came out of, because if you were to look at them, you can tell that there's a difference. This one right here has a nice rubber boot on it, so of course you're going to want to make sure you have it on the same side when you go to reinstall these. Let's go ahead and set them down. Now typically I like to go ahead and try to pull out my slider boots, but on these right here it's very common for them to tear, so if you don't necessarily have any new slider boots, you need to at least inspect them and make sure they're nice and soft and pliable and they're not torn or worn in any way. This one looks good. That one looks good as well, so we can continue on. The next thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and remove these caliper tins right here. Just go ahead and give it a little bonk. That's been in there for a while. Obviously, there was plenty of lubricant behind there. Not. Out of there. All right. So now the next thing that we want to make sure that we do is clean out this entire area along here, exactly where those tins were. The reason why the pads were stuck inside there is because of the buildup that's along these areas. It was kind of swelling out a little bit, pushing these tins out, and then they were squishing them up against the pads. When you step on the brakes, the pads are supposed to be able to squeeze up against that rotor right there, and then when you release the brake, the calipers are kind of supposed to just release the pressure, and the pads generally would kind of move away a little bit. If they're frozen in there, the pads are going to go ahead and squeeze up against because of the pressure of the brakes. You release, they can't move. They just stay directly against it. That's going to cause an overheating issue, and of course it's going to cause the issue that we have at hand. So I'm just going to continue on by cleaning these up. I usually use a little grinder like this. You can use whatever you want, a scrub brush or whatever you have. I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Try to aim it away from the camera. So this one's looking pretty good, but it definitely had a lot of buildup in it. So looking at this right here, you can tell that I got this complete side along there on both of these, all along this area, but I couldn't necessarily get into this area, so that's definitely something that you want to pay attention to. You can't just go ahead and skip it and just try to do like a half type of job and just try to get away with it. If you leave any buildup on there, you could potentially have a restriction, like I said before, where your pads can't move properly, in which case, why do you even do a brake job in the first place? You're going to have to redo these in a fairly short amount of time, and it just doesn't make sense. Let's clean this up a little bit more. All right, so both of these look good. Go ahead and do the same to the other side, and we'll move along. All that looks good. Now at this point, we're going to clean out these inner channels right here. Like I said, typically I'd want to go ahead and take these out, but where I don't want to damage these and I don't have new ones, I'm just going to go ahead and take the risk, put a little bit of parts cleaner in here. I always like to use a nice bore brush. This is going to help ensure that we get out any of the debris or gunk that's inside this. That's pretty much going all the way inside this channel right here, and that's exactly where these slider pins are going to ride. So we'll just go ahead and take that slider pin. You can see about how far it's going to go in there. So we want to essentially just make sure we get it all out of there. This one. Any of that gunk that might be in there. I'm going to hit it again with some parts cleaner. Okay, so now I'm going to continue on just by trying to dry this out as much as possible. While we have this drying, just go ahead and set it like that, put it down. We'll move along to those slider pins. Now, like I said, with the slider pins, you just want to try to remember exactly where they went. If you mix them up, you could easily forget, but it's really not that hard to remember if you just maybe took a note of it of some sort. So I'm just going to go ahead and take my clean rag here. Let's go ahead and wipe this down. Once you have it wiped down, you want to pay special attention to it. If it looks like it's all rotted or it has a whole bunch of rust buildup on it, that's commonly because along this area right here where there's a ridge, there's probably rot in there as well. And if that's the case, then it makes it so the boot can't sit on there properly. Moisture is going to make its way in, and it's going to seize up the pin. So you need to make sure that it's clean and free of any debris. If it looks like there's rot on this, there's more than likely rot on the inside of the bracket as well. So then you just need to pay extra special attention to that. Let's go ahead and continue wiping this down. Pay special attention to that groove along there. If it feels as though it needs to be cleaned out, you can of course use your brush. Let's go ahead and wipe that. Now this one looks really good, so I'll go ahead and put that down. We'll do the other one. Now with this one right here, we have that boot, so this is something a little extra that you want to pay attention to. Go ahead and wipe it off so I can show you it a little better. Now looking at the boot right here, as I feel my fingers along it like this, I can feel that it kind of rises up a little bit. That's very important because this is going to help with vibration dampening while you're driving down the road. But if this boot right here looks like it's swollen, like it's trying to bubble off of there, or you can even take the boot and you can almost slide it right off, you know that it's swollen with some type of contaminant, and that's going to cause a braking issue. This one feels really good. Wipe it off. Okay, I'm looking into the channel. I can see that I do have some debris coming along that edge right there. Go ahead and try to scrub it out of there. You can use a wire wheel for this or anything you might happen to have. Maybe even a screwdriver if you need to just get off the large chunks. Okay. Okay. Let's grab that bracket. Make sure it's clean. If you wanted to, maybe it felt like there was still a little bit more of that cleaner inside there, just go ahead and take your rag, give it a nice couple twists, and then we're just going to try to shove it right inside there. As you push it in, you might feel as though it bunches up. I just kind of keep twisting it, and it's going to work its way down in there overall. It's going to help get out any of the debris that might be stuck in there. Try to do the best brake job you can, because if the brakes aren't working properly, well, then you're not really fixing very much at all. That looks good. I always feel like there's cameras watching me. Okay. All right, so that looks good. Now the next thing you want to do is make sure that you apply lubricant to these. If you don't add any lubricant, as your brakes start to heat up, things are going to start to swell. And of course, there's always the probability that there might be moisture in the area. So you always want to make sure that you have plenty of lubricant on this. And then of course, make sure that you pay special attention to up along this ridge right here. If you put lubricant on there, that's going to help keep the moisture out of this area, which is very important. Go ahead and slide that into its corresponding hole. It should slide in free and easy. If it feels like you have to force it in any way, or it feels like it's sticking and it doesn't want to function properly, you need to continue on. If you know for sure that your slider pin is free and clean, then you need to get back inside here with your little bore brush. Get that rag out of here. With the bore brush, and maybe there's a possibility that there could be some kind of debris or restriction inside the caliper. Like I said, you need to take your time on doing your brakes, and you want to make sure you're doing them right. It doesn't make any sense to try to half it and, you know, maybe potentially put somebody's life at risk, because of course if your brakes aren't functioning properly, it's a safety issue. I have to drive on the road just like everybody else, and I like to get home safely. And slide that right in there. Okay. So now, of course, once I have the slider pins in, just going to give them a good wiggle. I like to spin them around a couple times. That just ensures that the grease and everything's made its way inside there. It's going to do its job. Let's continue on with a little bit more of that grease. And now at this point, we essentially just want to have a thin layer of grease. I'm going to go along all those areas that I just went ahead and sanded down. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. And it's also going to help make sure that moisture doesn't make its way in between the bracket and the tin. And of course cause it to swell up, which is then, you know, going to hold that pad in place, and you're going to have braking issues down the road. Some people don't add any lubricant here. That doesn't make any sense to me, but everybody just kind of does what they want to do. One thing that I would mention though is to not add too much lubricant. You don't want to go ahead and put so much on here like a big old glob, and then you put the tins on, you slide your pads in there, and it comes squirting out along this area, which is where the rotor would be. That's going to cause a major braking issue, and you're going to have contaminated pads, so that's something that you want to pay attention to as well. This looks good. So at this point, we can go ahead and set this aside. And what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and grab my new pads and rotors, compare them to my originals, and then we'll go ahead and grab those tins that should come with the new pads, put them into the brackets, and start putting everything together. All right, so we've got our original stuff right here, and you can tell that this is complete garbage. You can tell all the flaking that's coming off of this is what's causing our braking issue. You have a little bit of area where the pad was actually kind of trying to do its job. You have a lot of hot spots on here, but you also have a lot of rot buildup on this. Any of this rot is what's going to be causing our noise, and of course it's going to cause a braking issue. Not to mention, we have our pads. You already kind of had a look at this pad, and as you can tell, it's completely horrible. You don't have to work on cars to know that this is unsafe overall, and it's not something that you want to have somebody driving in a vehicle while you're driving down the road next to them. I want to make sure everybody can stop, so that's why it's important that we're making this video so you can see. Here's our brand new pads. There's a lot more meat to these. I'll just go ahead and put it just like this and like that, and you can tell that this is going to have much better braking ability than something like that. Now, obviously, this is an extreme case. Not everybody's driving around with worn-out brakes like this. This is just a maniac driving around. But then we also have this rotor over here. The rotor braking surface is nice and clean and free of any debris. Of course, it does still have the stuff on it that I need to go ahead and clean off before we install it, but I wanted to kind of give you a side-by-side so you can have an exact look of exactly what's going on our particular application. Okay, so I've got some nice new tins here. You, of course, want to pay attention to the direction that they need to go. A lot of times you're going to have like these little flippy-doos that kind of shoot off to the side. It's super important to make sure you put these in the right direction, because if I had it going in this direction with the flippy-doos facing in, it's of course going to hit right up against the rotor, and that doesn't make any sense. So let's go ahead and take this, slide it right into position. Sometimes these things are such a pain in the butt. It's mostly just when the camera's on. Everything's so much harder with the camera on. Okay, make sure I get it going the right direction. Okay. Yep, well, I put it upside down. That works. Let's put it on this side. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. Okay, continue on to this one. That ain't gonna work. That's the wrong one for this. I can get this on there. I'm gonna have to grab the rest of my tins. I must have grabbed an oddball. There's so many of these things. Let's try this one. Oh, there we go. Slide it in there. All right, so we're just going to double check. Make sure all 4 of our tins are in there nice and tight. They're completely secured. They can't just go ahead and fall right out of there. If they fall out, it's probably because those little clips or pins along the side there are kind of peened over or spread a little bit. Everything's nice and tight. Now let's get back over to the vehicle. Okay. Clean up the braking surfaces. It's always a good idea to make sure you pre-clean these down. A lot of times in shipping, they come coated, and that's pretty much just to prevent any type of moisture to sit on them. You don't want to go ahead and get brand new rotors with rust on them. It just doesn't look good. So they just put a protective coating on them. I always like to just clean it off. Slide that right on there. Grab one of your lug nuts. I'm going to go ahead and put it right on here. That's just essentially going to hold this rotor from moving around on me while I'm working. The last thing I want is this flopping around, possibly falling off and hurting me while I'm trying to work, or even getting rust behind this area right there. And then it's going to cause an issue, like I said before, possibly a brake pulsation. Put this thing on here. You probably noticed on the bolt itself, when I was putting it in, I like to use some red thread locker on these. That's essentially because I definitely don't want these to loosen up while I'm driving down the road. A lot of times you're going to hit a lot of potholes or anything the like. The last thing you want is your brakes loosening up while you're driving. Let's go ahead and torque those. Torque specs are different on most vehicles, so I'm not going to necessarily tell you this one. But it is a good idea to make sure you torque them to manufacturer's specifications. Now let's grab our pads. So now let's just look at our original pad here. This is the inboard pad. You're gonna see that you have the wear indicator, or maybe I guess some people call it a squealer. Why is it called a squealer? Well, when the brakes are getting worn, well, they should have a little bit more meat than this. This wear indicator over here is supposed to kind of start squealing up against that rotor and let you know that your pads are getting low. Basically, so you're not driving around with pads that look like this. This is just lunacy. So, with that said, whenever you get new pads, you always need to make sure that you go ahead and put on a wear indicator. Generally, your brand new pads are going to come with those along with the tins. So you just go ahead and you take that wear indicator, and you're going to slide it right into position like this. Now looking at it, you can see that it kind of comes up a little bit from the backing there, and that's essentially just approximately 1 to maybe 2 seconds up and away from the backing. That way there, when this pad gets worn down to the point that it's about to be unsafe, this is going to start making some noise, and it's going to prevent you from driving down the road unsafely. So I'll just go ahead and put this in here. Sometimes you have to start in one side and then just kind of rock it. That's kind of what happens on these. Should want to slide in there. Okay, so now once your pad's in, you want to make sure that you go ahead and give it a wiggle around. If it feels like it's in, maybe you even had to use a hammer or anything like, and then you try to move it and it doesn't want to move at all, you need to go ahead and take it back apart and re-clean these brackets. I mentioned it before, and I'm going to mention it again because it's super important. The pads need to be able to move around inside this freely so that they can release as soon as you release that caliper. Continue on to the outer pad. It's essentially the same. This one right here, you're not necessarily going to have a squealer on. You only really need to have it on your inboard pad. That looks good. Let's continue on to the caliper here. Now for the caliper, I always continue with a little bit of grease on these. Some people, like I said before, aren't necessarily going to use grease. I always like to use it right on the metal surfaces. So on this one right here, our caliper piston itself is made out of metal. I'll go ahead and put it right on this. And then we also have 2 contact points on the other side, these 2 ears right here. Essentially any piece of metal that's going to hit up against those pads, I want to make sure that I have a fair amount of lubricant in between. That's going to help with noise reduction and vibration overall. So of course I just like to have it on there. You could take this and you could just try to coat your whole pad. I don't know if that really makes too much sense to me, but you can kind of do what you want. Essentially the more grease, the more dirt that's going to accumulate in the area, and it's not really good overall. So I'll just go ahead and take this. I'm going to slide it right over the caliper bracket here and over those pads. Perfect. There we are. So that slides right over. Before we go ahead and put in our mounting bolts, check that flex hose. If the flex hose has like a pigtail or it looks like it's twisted in any way, it could cause a restriction. So you just want to make sure it's clean and it doesn't have any like kinks or anything the like. This one looks good. We can grab our 2 mounting bolts. Now for these right here, if you wanted to use some red thread locker, it's completely your prerogative. Once again, everything pretty much just comes down to what you want to do personally. In my preference, I don't necessarily put any red thread locker on these just because sometimes they can get stuck inside the sliders and that can be an issue. Snug those up. As you saw, these bolts are much smaller than the actual caliper bracket bolts, so the torque for these is going to be a little bit less. Once again, you still want to go by the manufacturer specifications, but you don't want to go ahead and just go ahead and torque these to the same torque that you torque the other ones to. You could potentially break the bolts or even over torque them and stretch them. So I'm just going to go ahead and set up my torque wrench here. I'm going down from 79 to 26, so this might just take a second. There we go, 30. Every vehicle is going to have a different torque spec, like I said. So it's kind of hard to get in here. There's that. Torqued, torqued. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead and get this lug nut off of here and grab the wheel. Now when I put on the lug nuts, I always like to start them all on by hand. I don't want to go ahead and cross thread them. After I have them started, I'm just going to go ahead and bottom them out. I'll have to get the wheel on the ground to be able to torque it. And when I torque it, I need to go in a crisscross manner. The reason for that is, of course, I want to make sure that the wheel isn't sitting off kilter. Because if I have it like this, and maybe it's caught on something, I tighten it up, I torque it, then I drive down the road, I hit a bump. That's completely unsafe. Let's go ahead and bottom these out. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to continue on to doing the other side brakes. The process for that is going to be the exact same as this side. I don't know how much time you got or how long you want to sit around watching a video of me doing the same exact thing on the other side. So we'll just go ahead and skip ahead past that. Once I'm done, we'll go ahead and get this on the ground and, like I said, torque everything up and then take it for a road test. All right, so I got the other side brakes done and now we have the vehicle back on the ground. Of course, we're going to want to make sure that we torque our lug nuts to manufacturer specifications. If you had a lug nut, if you had your hubcap, go ahead and put that right back on there. Okay, so now we have this completely situated. You want to make sure that if you had hubcaps, they're definitely on there nice and tight and they're not going to fall off while you're driving. Now I'm just going to go ahead and hop up into the vehicle. I'm going to make sure that I pump up that brake pedal. I want it to be nice and firm. After that, we'll go ahead and get under the hood and we're going to triple check that master cylinder. We just want to make sure that the fluid's up to par. If it isn't, we'll just go ahead and top it off, close the hood, and then we'll take it for a road test. That feels good. Okay, give this a little wiggle. Well, honestly, it's pretty much up to the maximum line, so this looks pretty good at this point. We can close the hood and let's go for a road test. Okay. So generally when you first do your brakes, as you initially step on them, you're going to kind of hear a little bit of a noise, and the brakes might even sound a little weird at first. That's essentially because they're kind of both rough. Your pads are a rough surface and the rotors are a rough surface. They kind of need to wear into each other, so it's like a break-in period. So what I generally like to do is I'll just drive like approximately 5 miles an hour, maybe 10, and then just come to a nice, slow, long brake. There we are, fully stopped. Now I'm going to go ahead and go maybe 15, 20 miles an hour. Do the same thing. And what this is going to do is it's going to gradually heat up those brakes. The pads and the rotors are eventually going to wear into each other, and they're going to eventually become a little bit more smooth, and you're going to hear a lot less noise. So what I'm also listening for is to hear if there's any type of pulsation or a thumping or anything the like while I'm driving, because that was the initial issue. So of course I want to make sure that when I diagnose the issue, I also fix the issue. I said it in my other video where I did an ABS issue. We diagnosed it, and of course I told you that I wanted to make sure that every time I diagnose something, I always like to personally fix it. That essentially is going to make it so I know for sure that I diagnosed it properly, and of course it's fixed, and I know that the vehicle is going to be safe driving down the road. Let's go ahead and use these brakes a couple more times here. Wow, these feel great. This guy's going to be happy. Awesome. Let's do a panic stop, just cause. Hold on, camera guy. Not bad. Now, if you like the video, or you love the video, or maybe you learned a little something, go ahead and share it with whoever you might think might appreciate the video. If you like the video, smash on the like button for me. It would mean the world. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe, ring the bell, especially if you like this type of video. Thanks. This guy's gonna get out of the way. We're never gonna get back. Unbelievable. I got all day. All day, nice little road test. I always feel like there's cameras watching me.